Hey guys, look, Dad's junk doesn't belong under our Christmas tree. It's going straight into the trash. My daughter-in-law threw the box into the trash. My son looked away. My grandchildren's smiles froze. And I stood there, embarrassed under the Christmas lights. But what they didn't know, the next day, the police came to their house. Before we dive into how it came to this, if you believe karma always finds its way, hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The tree flickered like 1,000 tiny bells, and still I felt small beneath it. I wrapped the gifts with the same care I used to sand a cradle's slow strokes, edges softened, ribbon neat. I slid them under the branches while my grandchildren giggled. Then Rebecca lifted a box as if it were contaminated and smiled for her audience. Hey, guys, look. Dad's junk doesn't belong under our Christmas tree. It's going straight into the trash. No, very for. Not the children, people who should have known better, laughed. Christopher did not laugh. He did worse. He looked away, hands in his pockets, as if I were a stranger who had wandered into his house by mistake. The box hit the bin with a hollow sound. In that silence I heard what I had given up. The workshop I sold for his tuition, the down payment on his first apartment, the nights I measured boards by lamplight so he could dream in comfort. The lights blinked on, off, on like a heartbeat enduring. I did not defend myself. Years teach a man how to hold his breath when sawdust fills the air. I held mine and tasted humiliation as dry as pine needles. My grandson reached for the gift. Rebecca shook her head and smiled that cool smile that says, "Power is a toy." The party found its rhythm again, music, clinking glasses, the rustle of expensive clothes. I laced my fingers so they would not shake. Christopher passed me once. He said nothing. Near midnight, I put on my coat. No one walked me to the door. Snow tapped the porch like a polite guest. I listened to the house that held my effort in its walls, my sacrifice, my hope, and understood something simple and hard. They wanted me gone. I did not cry. I went home with the quiet a carpenter learns. I brewed tea, set the empty space at my table, and laid out a different kind of gift. Folders, dates, signatures. Not revenge balance. The level I used to place on a beam to make a room true. By morning, the decision had set like cured glue. And the next day, the police came to their house. I did not cry. I went home with the quiet a carpenter learns. I brewed tea, set the empty space at my table, and laid out a different kind of gift folders, dates, signatures, not revenge balance. The level I used to place on a beam to make a room true. But before balance came memory. Memories of sawdust on my shirt, of my boy holding nails in his small fist while I hammered. I taught him the difference between oak and pine before he could ride a bicycle. Nights, when other fathers watched television, I traced lines on planks, and Christopher sat beside me, his head bobbing as he fought sleep. I carried him to bed, whispering promises that he would never lack what I had lacked. I kept those promises. I sold the shop my father left me. I signed away security for tuition checks. When Christopher dreamed of an apartment near the city, I emptied my savings. Later, when he wanted a business of his own, I walked into a bank and put my name down as guarantor. My hands shook worse than they did that night under the tree, but I signed, always for him. I believed sacrifice was love. I believed he understood. He used to smile, call me his rock, his anchor. He told friends, "My dad made me who I am." I carried those words like medals on my chest. Now those words felt like sawdust, blown away, forgotten. I looked at the folders on my table. Receipts, contracts, promises. Each page a proof that my love had weight. They had forgotten, but paper remembers. I poured more tea, the steam rising like ghosts of the past. My wife's photograph watched me from the mantel. I whispered to her as if she still sat beside me. I kept my word. I gave him everything. And still, the night answered with silence. Only the crack of the heater, like wood splitting under strain. And in that silence, I began to understand. The story was no longer about what I had given, it was about what they had done with it. Character count, 2008. The years blurred like grain under a rough plane. I can still see the day Christopher introduced me to Rebecca. She swept into my house with perfume sharp enough to sting, heels clicking against my old wooden floor. She glanced at my furniture handmade, every piece, and smiled without warmth. "So this is where you live," she said, as if the walls were beneath her. I wanted to believe she would grow kinder with time. A father wants to believe his son chooses well. But little by little, her words chipped away at me. At dinners, she made jokes about my clothes. the smell of turpentine on my hands, the way I brought practical gifts instead of jewelry or gadgets. Christopher would laugh nervously, then change the subject. That silence was worse than laughter. It was permission. Soon I noticed how my son carried himself differently. He bought expensive suits, spoke with a sharper tone, and the warmth we once shared cooled. When we were alone, I tried to remind him of the nights in the workshop, the smell of pine, the satisfaction of a board cut true. He nodded politely, like a man listening to an old story he no longer believed in. At gatherings, Rebecca's friends whispered just loud enough for me to hear, calling me old-fashioned, out of place. I swallowed those words like splinters, each one cutting deeper. My grandchildren, once eager to sit on my lap, began to imitate their mother's smirk. They pulled away from my calloused hands, preferring the glitter she dangled before them. Still, I held my tongue. I told myself family was worth enduring. But endurance has limits. Each insult, each laugh at my expense, carved its mark. By the time Christmas came that year, the wood of our bond was already splitting. Rebecca's hand on that gift box was only the final hammer strike, and Christopher, my son, let it happen. That was the betrayal I could not plane smooth, no matter how steady my hands. The gatherings that followed were not family, they were performances. Rebecca staged them like theater, every table setting a signal of her wealth, every conversation an audition for status. I was allowed a chair, but never a place. My presence was tolerated, like a coat rack in the corner. When I tried to offer gifts, I gave what I knew: hand-carved toys, small stools, a jewelry box lined with velvet. I had sanded the edges smooth, polished until they shone. The children barely touched them. Rebecca wrinkled her nose and said, "You still make these? No one needs old junk anymore." The laughter that followed was softer than that Christmas night, but sharper to me because it was constant, a drip wearing down stone. Christopher said little. Sometimes he would pat my shoulder as if I were a guest. Other times he avoided my eyes altogether. My son, the boy who once fell asleep in my arms while I worked late, now treated me like a relic he could not throw away but did not want displayed. The grandchildren grew bolder. They mimicked Rebecca's tone, turning their noses up at my sweaters or muttering, "Cheap," when I brought candy. I did not scold them. Children only repeat what they hear. Still, each word landed heavy, heavier than oak beams. I invited them once to my small house, hoping to show them the workshop where their father had learned his first lessons. They barely stepped inside. Rebecca ushered them out quickly, saying, "Don't touch anything, you'll get dirty." The look she gave me then was final. I was not family, only background. So I stayed silent. I smiled for photographs. I raised my glass when told. But inside, I counted the moments, each one proof that my sacrifices were invisible. What I built for them, they had repainted in colors that erased me. By the time another Christmas came, I knew. The stage was set, the audience ready. Rebecca would deliver her line, and Christopher would stay silent. My part in their play was humiliation, and I played it, until the curtain fell. That Christmas was colder than any before. I carried my wrapped boxes inside, my hands stiff from the snow, my heart still hoping for warmth. The tree sparkled. The house buzzed with laughter. I told myself, this time they will see me. This time they will remember. I bent down, sliding the gifts beneath the branches. They were simple things, books I knew the children loved, a puzzle, a handmade music box. Rebecca's voice sliced through the air before I could rise. "Hey guys, look. Dad's junk doesn't belong under our Christmas tree. It's going straight into the trash." She lifted one box high, grinning like it was part of the show. The guests turned, waiting. Christopher stood by, lips pressed shut. He did not defend me. He did not stop her. My grandchildren froze, torn between fear and loyalty. And then, with a flick of her wrist, the box hit the bin. The sound echoed louder than the carols. My cheeks burned, but I did not speak. I saw in that moment the truth. Every sacrifice, every dollar, every hour I had given, lay in that trash with the wrapping paper. My son would not save it. My family would not remember it. I was alone under the glow of lights I had helped hang. Guests coughed, shifted uncomfortably. A neighbor muttered something about respect. Rebecca only laughed, brushing her hands as if she had tidied a mess. Christopher looked at the floor. My name, my role, my worth, discarded like the box. I stood straighter than I felt. My hands trembled, so I clasped them behind my back. Not a word passed my lips. Silence was the only gift I could give them then. When the night ended, no one offered me a ride. I stepped into the snow alone. Each flake felt heavy, like all the years pressing down. I walked home with humiliation in my chest, but also something else. A decision, quiet but firm, setting within me like concrete. I would not shout. I would not beg. I would remember. And one day, they would too. I remember the smell of pine shavings, the soft rasp of a hand plane smoothing an edge. Those sounds and scents were the lullabies of my life. Long before Rebecca, long before the house that shut me out, there was the workshop. My boy, my Christopher, used to sit on a stool with his legs swinging, watching me work. His eyes followed every cut of the saw, as though I were performing magic. And in those eyes, I believed I was. When his mother died, I promised her picture by the bedside that our son would not want for anything. That vow became the compass of my life. I worked days at the shop, nights on commissions, and weekends teaching Christopher how to hold a hammer without smashing his fingers. I gave him laughter when I had none, meals when I had to go hungry. He was my reason, my pride, my purpose. I sold the workshop years later, not because I wanted to, but because tuition demanded it. Christopher needed college, and I would not let him carry the burden alone. I told myself it was worth it, that wood could be replaced, but a future could not. I shook hands with the buyer and walked away from the smell of varnish, telling myself it was not an ending, but a beginning for him. The sacrifices stacked higher with each year, an apartment deposit when he dreamed of independence, a car loan co-signed so he could drive to interviews. Later, the biggest risk of all, I pledged my name to the bank for his first business loan. My palms sweated ink onto the papers, but I signed. Always for him, always. I did not keep receipts to count what I lost. I kept them as proof of love. Every dollar, every hour bent over wood. Every night I stayed awake, wondering how to stretch the money far enough. These were not complaints. They were offerings. Offerings I thought would buy him a life better than mine. Now, when I sit in my quiet house, those memories ache like an old injury. They remind me of what I gave and what was thrown away, louder than the laughter that Christmas night. Sacrifice was supposed to build a bridge. Instead, it became the wood they burned to keep me outside. Loneliness is a sound. It is the clink of one cup on a table meant for four. It is the shuffle of slippers in a hallway with no laughter at the end. After that Christmas, my house echoed with it. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the empty chair where my wife used to sit, where Christopher once sprawled with his homework, where grandchildren might have colored pictures if Rebecca allowed them near me. I tried to eat, but food lost its taste. Bread turned to ash. Even tea could not warm me. I stared at the photograph of my wife on the mantel, her smile frozen in time, and I confessed to her shadow what I would not say to anyone else. I think I lost him. I think I lost them all. The phone never rang. No invitation came. Days blurred into nights, nights into weeks. Neighbors sometimes knocked to bring pie or check on me, but pity felt like salt on raw skin. I smiled, thanked them, then closed the door quickly, ashamed of my own need. I wandered the house and touched the walls I had built with my own hands. Each nail, each board had once carried purpose, now it carried silence. I thought of the years when Christopher's laughter filled these rooms, when he begged to stay up late in the workshop, when he promised me that no matter how far he went, he would never forget. Promises are lighter than dust when silence follows them. Nights were the hardest. I would sit by the window, watching cars pass, wondering if one might slow, if perhaps my son would step out, contrite, ready to apologize. But the road stayed empty. Only the snow came, covering everything in a white that looked peaceful from the outside. But inside my heart, it felt like burial. Loneliness is not loud. It does not scream. It whispers, steady and cruel, until you almost believe it. And I sat in that whisper, night after night, waiting for a sound that never came. There was a time when my grandchildren called me Papa Gabe, with voices bright as bells. They climbed my lap, pulled at my beard, begged for stories about the old workshop. I carved wooden trains, little horses, puzzles with secret drawers, and their laughter filled every corner of my small house. In those moments I felt rich beyond measure. But Rebecca changed that. Slowly, subtly, she planted her words like weeds. She told them my gifts were old-fashioned, unsafe, splinters waiting to happen. She said I was poor, and poor meant shame. At first, they only repeated her words in play. Papa's toys are junk. They giggled, not understanding. I laughed it off, telling myself children only mimic what they hear. Then came the distance. They stopped asking to visit. When I brought toys, They pushed them aside for shiny gadgets Rebecca had bought. At gatherings, they sat closer to her, whispering into her sleeves, while glancing at me with eyes no longer wide with wonder. Once, my granddaughter brushed my hand away and said, "Mom says your house smells funny." That cut deeper than any blade I had ever handled. I kept carving. I thought maybe if I built something beautiful enough, they would see me again. I spent nights shaping a rocking horse from oak, strong and steady. I imagined their laughter echoing as they rode it. When I delivered it, Rebecca thanked me with a tight smile and said, "We don't have room for big things like this. Better give it to charity." My son stood beside her, silent, nodding. I took the horse back home. It still stands in the corner of my living room, untouched, waiting. Sometimes I run my hand over its smooth surface, and I hear the ghost of their laughter, fading each year. That horse is not just wood. It is memory, hope, and heartbreak combined. The truth settled heavy. I was no longer their grandfather in their eyes. I was only an old man on the edges of their new life. And Rebecca had made sure of it. Christopher's rise looked dazzling from the outside. New suits tailored to his frame, a gleaming car in the driveway, vacations to islands I had only seen on postcards. Neighbors praised him as a success story. They said, "You must be proud." And I nodded, because pride was easier to show than the truth. The truth was that his empire was built on my back. I remember the day he came to me, eyes bright, voice trembling with ambition. "Dad, I've got an idea. I just need a little help." A little help turned into everything I had. I mortgaged my workshop, sold the tools that had fed us, signed papers that carried more weight than steel beams. I put my name where his should have been, guaranteeing loans so he could stand tall. I watched him climb while my own life shrank smaller. The kitchen grew colder without the smell of wood shavings, my evenings emptier without the hum of a saw. I told myself it was worth it. A father sacrifices. A father gives until his hands are bare. And for a while, Christopher remembered. He called me his rock, told friends, "My dad made this possible." I held those words close, the way a carpenter grips a level proof that what he built was true. But the words faded. Soon he stopped mentioning me at all. In interviews, he said he had built himself from nothing. The nothing he spoke of was me. I was erased from his story, the way sawdust is swept from a floor. I would sit at home with unpaid bills while the television showed my son shaking hands at banquets, Rebecca on his arm, jewels flashing. They toasted to his brilliance while I ate soup alone. Still, I did not complain. Love, I thought, means silence. Love means patience. Love means letting him shine, even if I am left in the shadows. But patience wears thin, silence grows heavy, and love when betrayed becomes something else entirely. Shame has a way of following you like smoke. After that Christmas, whispers spread through the neighborhood. People asked if I was all right, if I needed anything. They said it gently, but I heard the undertone they had heard what Rebecca did. Some had even been there. Their pity pressed harder than her insult. I carried it on my shoulders every time I walked to the store. I could not explain. So, how do you tell others that your own blood stood silent while you were discarded like trash? So I smiled, nodded, and said I was fine. Then I went home and shut the door, where no one could see the red in my eyes. I replayed the moment endlessly, the sound of the box hitting the bin, the way Christopher's eyes slid away from mine, the laughter that followed. It clung to me like resin on skin, no matter how many times I tried to wash it off. Nights stretched long. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling beams, thinking of all the beams I had raised for others, beams that held roofs over heads that now mocked me. I stopped visiting gatherings. Why walk into fire willingly? Better to stay home, better to let the world believe I was too old, too tired, too sick. Excuses were easier than admitting the truth that I was unwelcome in the very family I had built. Still, in the silence, something stirred, a stubborn ember that refused to die. Each insult, each laugh, each look away, it all piled like kindling. And though I felt shame heavy as iron, I also felt something sharper beneath it. Not rage, not yet, but resolve. Quiet, patient, waiting. Shame taught me to bow my head, but the ember taught me to lift it again. And slowly, I began to understand that my silence was not endless. It was only the pause before the next strike of the hammer. Her words echo still. This family doesn't need dead weight. She said it one evening when I offered to help clean after dinner. Rebecca's voice was smooth, rehearsed, but her eyes were sharp. Christopher stood beside her, adjusting his cufflinks, and did not object. In that silence I heard consent. I carried the plates anyway, washed them slowly, the way I used to sand planks, steady, careful, pretending the sting of her words did not splinter me. The children ran past me without a glance. I was the shadow in their bright, polished home. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice again and again. Dead weight. She wanted me gone, not just from her house, but from her story, from Christopher's life, from the future of my grandchildren, erased. And worse than her cruelty was his silence, the way he let her words stand like a verdict. I thought of my wife, of the promise I had made at her grave, that I would raise Christopher with love, no matter the cost. I had paid that cost. Every dollar, every bead of sweat, every year of my life was a coin I dropped into his future. Now Rebecca wanted to sweep that future clean of me, as if I were dust on her marble floors. The truth settled heavy. They didn't just want me out of their home. They wanted me erased from memory, a ghost without name or voice. And for the first time, I wondered if silence was still love, or if silence was surrender. I closed my eyes, clenched my fists, and let the thought burn. If I was dead weight, then I would show them the weight of truth. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And when it came, they would know that even a shadow leaves a mark. The night after Rebecca called me dead weight, I sat at my kitchen table with the lamp burning low. My hands shook as I reached for a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were folders, thick and heavy, filled with paper that smelled of dust and ink. Receipts, contracts, bank statements, all the pieces of my past I could never throw away. I pulled out the loan guarantee I had signed for Christopher's first business. My name stood bold on the line, my signature written with trembling pride. Without it, he would never have received the money to start. Next came tax returns, contracts with suppliers, even letters of gratitude he had once written to me before Rebecca. Each page was a nail in the frame of his success, and each nail had been hammered with my sacrifice. I flipped through those papers, and for the first time, I saw not only love, but leverage. These were not scraps of memory. They were evidence, proof that what Christopher and Rebecca flaunted as theirs had roots in my sweat, my risks, my trust. Proof that their wealth was built on ground far less stable than they believed. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and let the thought settle. They wanted me erased, but paper remembers, ink remembers, and if I chose to, the world would remember too. I gathered the files neatly, stacking them as if I were building a beam to bear weight. My carpenter's hands were steady now. Shame had bowed me, but truth straightened me again. I whispered to the empty room, to my wife's photograph above the mantel. I think I found it the way to make them see. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, because I knew I still held the key, and when the time came, that key would open more than doors. It would open reckoning. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme. Dust coated the beams, and every box was a coffin of years gone by. I climbed the ladder slowly, my knees stiff but my purpose sharp. The lamp in my hand threw shadows across the rafters, and I felt like a man descending into memory instead of rising into storage. I dragged out the old banker's boxes, the ones I had carried from house to house, never opening, never discarding. They were heavy, not only with paper but with history. Inside were ledgers from the workshop, tax returns from decades past, letters from banks, and stacks of receipts bound with twine. Most men would have thrown them away, but not me. A carpenter never wastes. A carpenter saves every nail, every scrap, every record of the work his hands have done. I sat on the attic floor and spread the papers around me. My fingers traced signatures, dates, seals. There was my name beside Christopher's, my promise to the bank that he would repay. There were the payment schedules, the amended tax filings, the statements I had signed to prove solvency. My entire life of sacrifice laid bare in ink. But mixed among them I noticed patterns. Numbers that did not align. Income shifted. Deductions stretched thin. Filings that looked more like inventions than truth. Rebecca's name appeared often, her signature scrawled beside my son's on documents I knew they hadn't shared with me. The puzzle began to take shape, each page a piece fitting into the next. My heart did not race. It slowed. Cold clarity settled in me like winter frost. I realized I wasn't only holding proof of my sacrifice. I was holding proof of their deceit. Fraud hid in these pages like rot beneath polished wood. They had built their mansion on a hollow frame. The attic creaked as I stacked the files carefully, creating order from the chaos. My hands moved steady, precise, as if I were measuring a joint. For the first time, I felt no humiliation, no shame. I felt power quiet, lawful, undeniable. And I knew when the time came these papers would not just speak, they would judge. I carried the boxes downstairs and spread the papers across my kitchen table. The lamp glowed warm, but the truth I uncovered was cold. Line by line, I studied the documents like blueprints of a crooked house. At first it was small things, deductions for trips that were never taken, receipts inflated beyond reason. Then bigger cracks showed contracts signed under shell companies, property transfers on paper that didn't match reality. I saw Rebecca's signature next to Christopher's, scrawled over documents that claimed expenses for parties passed off as business meetings. I saw tax filings that shifted numbers like cards in a crooked dealer's hand. I knew enough to understand. This wasn't just creative accounting. It was fraud. Fraud stacked on lies. Lies stacked on the very foundation I had given them. They had taken my sacrifice and used it not just for success, but for deceit. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. In the workshop, when a beam showed rot, you could cut it out, replace it, make the structure sound again. But this was rot at the core. They hadn't built a home. They had built a facade, and behind the polished surface was nothing but emptiness. I pulled out a notebook and began writing everything down. Dates, amounts, names. My carpenter's hand, trained to mark measurements with precision, now traced the outlines of their corruption. Each note was a nail. Each page, another plank in the case, taking shape before me. For the first time in years, I did not feel like dead weight. I felt like the beam they had forgotten, quiet, strong, and waiting. If the world saw what I held in my hands, their empire would crumble like a house with no foundation. I closed the folders carefully, almost reverently. Then I whispered to myself, steady and low, paper remembers. The next step was not rage. It was counsel. A carpenter does not strike nails blindly. He measures twice, cuts once. So I took the papers to a man who knew how to measure law. His office smelled of leather and ink. The lawyer, Mr. Harlan, was younger than Christopher, but his eyes were sharp, steady. I placed the folders on his desk without flourish. My voice was calm when I said, "I need you to look at these." He adjusted his glasses, flipped through the first pages, then slowed. His finger tapped the margin of a tax return. He pulled another document, then another. His brows knit tighter with every page. Finally, he leaned back, staring at me as though I had delivered dynamite wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Whitman, do you realize what this is?" "I know what I signed," I said. "I know what they filed. I want to know what the law says about it." He exhaled slowly. "This is enough to open multiple investigations. Fraud, tax evasion, misrepresentation to lenders. If this goes to the authorities, your son and his wife won't just lose money, they could lose everything." I nodded once. My heart did not lurch. It beat steady, like a mallet striking true. "Then let the law see it." Mr. Harlan studied me, perhaps expecting anger, tears, regret. But I offered none. I had lived long enough to know that shouting at rotten wood does not make it sound. You cut it out. You replace it. You restore balance. He began organizing the files, labeling them with neat tags. "We'll prepare the submissions carefully," he said, quietly. "Once the agencies have this, it will move quickly." I left his office with lighter hands but a heavier certainty. The decision was no longer private. It was a beam locked into place, immovable. Justice had its blueprint now. As I stepped into the cold evening air, snowflakes touched my cheeks like silent witnesses, and I whispered to myself, "This isn't revenge. This is correction." Nights grew quieter after I left Mr. Harlan's office, but my mind no longer churned with shame. It worked with purpose. I spread the remaining papers across my kitchen table, arranging them into neat rows like planks ready for assembly. For years I had carried the weight of their insults. Now, the weight shifted, it became evidence, order, design. I traced every number, every signature, every inconsistency. I made notes in the margins, arrows pointing to their lies. I thought of Christopher and Rebecca smiling in their mansion, believing their wealth untouchable. They had forgotten that truth is not fragile. It waits. It survives. And when it comes, it does not knock. It breaks the door. Sometimes I paused, staring at my wife's picture on the mantel. I asked her quietly if what I was doing was right. Was this vengeance, or was it justice? Her smile in that faded photo gave no answer. But I remembered her voice telling me long ago, "Always build straight, Gabe. Crooked beams don't last." They had built crooked, I was not tearing them down. I was only removing the rot. The law would do the rest. At night I slept easier, though dreams came strange, sawdust falling like snow, beams cracking, hammers ringing in empty halls. I would wake with steady breath, reminding myself, patience. A carpenter knows patience. You cannot rush glue to dry or wood to cure. You wait, and when the moment is right, the structure stands firm. So I waited, and in that waiting, I felt the shift inside me. No longer the humiliated father, no longer the discarded guest. I was the keeper of truth, the man who measured twice, cut once, and soon the cut would come. One afternoon I drove past the old workshop, the building I had sold to pay for Christopher's future. The sign had changed, the paint faded, but the bones of the place were mine. I parked and stood by the door, smelling faint traces of varnish and sawdust in the wind. Memory pressed close nights of teaching my boy to hold a chisel, mornings when we built birdhouses side by side. That workshop had been our church, our bond, our foundation. Now it belonged to another man. He waved politely from inside, unaware that his tools rested on benches I had built with my own hands. I didn't begrudge him. He had bought it fair. But standing there, I realized something bitter and true. I had given away not just wooden walls, but pieces of myself. All for Christopher. And he had let Rebecca throw that gift in the trash with a laugh. I pressed my hand to the doorframe, rough beneath my palm. In carpentry, nothing lasts without care. Even oak rots if neglected. And love, too, if mocked and forgotten, decays into something unrecognizable. But that day, I did not feel sorrow. I felt clarity. The workshop was gone. My sacrifices were past. What remained was the truth, bound in papers at home, waiting for their purpose. I could not rebuild the bond with Christopher, but I could build something else, accountability. As I turned to leave, I whispered into the empty lot. You've forgotten where you came from, but the foundation remembers. Having to great Terrangents. The words steadied me. I drove home with resolve hard as oak, ready to set the final nails into place. The files on my kitchen table were no longer just memory. They were justice in waiting, and soon justice would knock on their door. The files no longer sat scattered. I organized them the way I once organized planks before a build, straight, aligned, each one measured for purpose. Contracts in one folder, tax filings in another, receipts bundled and clipped. My table looked less like chaos and more like a blueprint of their downfall. I copied every page, careful not to miss a single detail. I marked the ones Mr. Harlan said were strongest fraudulent transfers, false deductions, altered income reports, evidence that spoke not of mistakes, but of intent. Every stroke of their pen had carved their own gallows. They just didn't know it yet. When the work was done, I placed the originals back in their boxes and set the copies neatly into a leather binder. The weight of it was heavy in my hands, heavier than any beam I had carried. But this weight didn't bend my back, it straightened it. I sat with the binder on my lap and listened to the ticking clock. The sound reminded me of a metronome in the shop, the rhythm steady, marking time until glue dried or stain set. Now it marked time until justice moved. Patience, I told myself. A carpenter does not rush. He waits for the wood to settle before striking the final nail. That night, I placed the binder in my bag and set it by the door. The decision was no longer brewing in my chest. It was real, solid, ready. I would hand it over and let the law carry the weight that had pressed on me for years. For the first time since my humiliation, I felt peace. Because soon, silence would no longer protect them. Paper would speak, and its voice would be louder than Rebecca's laughter ever was. Mr. Harlan kept his word. Within weeks, the files were no longer just mine. They sat on the desks of auditors, investigators, men and women trained to see rot where others only saw polish. I imagined them flipping pages, their brows furrowing as the lies unfolded line by line. Rebecca and Christopher's empire was now under a microscope, every corner lit. I did not need to stand in their house to confront them. The law had entered for me, quietly, at first letters, notices, requests for clarification. Then louder, official audits, subpoenas, frozen accounts. The gears had begun to turn, and nothing could stop them now. From my kitchen window, I watched the world outside move as always. Children played in the snow, neighbors shoveled driveways. No one knew that in another part of town, my son's mansion had become a fortress of panic. I did not need to see it. I could feel it. Rebecca, pacing, Christopher snapping at phone calls, both of them sensing the walls closing in. And through it all, I remained still. My tea steamed in its cup, my chair steady beneath me. I had struck no blow, shouted no curse. All I had done was open a box of papers and let the truth breathe. The attic had given me memory. The lawyer had given me direction. The law now gave me distance. Their downfall was no longer in my hands. It was in the hands of justice. And justice, once awakened, does not fall asleep. I closed my eyes and let the thought settle deep. I had been humiliated in front of family, silenced by my own son, erased by laughter. But now, in silence of my own, I had answered. And the answer would echo louder than their jeers. The first cracks showed in whispers. A neighbor mentioned that Christopher's car hadn't left the driveway in days. Another said Rebecca looked pale at the market, snapping at the cashier over a card that wouldn't run. I listened, silent, and stirred my tea. The storm had begun, though they still pretended it was only weather. Soon the news reached me in clearer ways. Christopher's accounts were frozen. The business that once boasted glossy ads and lavish parties suddenly postponed events, citing unforeseen difficulties. I read the announcements in the paper, each word a chisel chip at their polished image. They thought wealth was marble, but marble cracks under pressure. At night, I pictured their kitchen, not filled with laughter, but with raised voices. Rebecca demanding answers, Christopher insisting it was a mistake. She had mocked my gifts as junk. Now the gifts she flaunted were slipping through her fingers. Jewels, clothes, dinners, all useless when the bank balance turns to dust. And me? I remained still. I did not call. I did not gloat. I sat in my chair, hands folded, watching the world shift. For years I had been told I was nothing. Now, their everything was unraveling without me lifting more than a pen. There is a rhythm to collapse, like a beam groaning before it snaps. I had heard it in workshops, seen it in houses, left to rot. That same rhythm echoed in their lives, now quiet at first, then louder, unstoppable, and in the silence of my own home, I knew the structure I had built for them was finally giving way, not because I struck it with anger, but because truth had found its weight. And truth, once set, does not bend. It didn't take long for the ripples to spread. Their so-called friends, the ones who clinked glasses at their parties and praised Rebecca's gowns, began to keep their distance. I heard it from a neighbor who moved in those circles. People are saying your son's in trouble with the government. Nobody wants to be caught standing too close. I smiled politely, said nothing. Inside, I thought of the way Rebecca used to parade me, like a burden, her friends snickering at my clothes, my handmade gifts. Now those same friends crossed the street to avoid her. High society is loyal only to the shine of wealth, and when the shine fades, loyalty vanishes. Reports surfaced quietly, then louder. Investigations, allegations, fraudulent filings. The whispers hardened into fact, and fact into scandal. Rebecca stopped appearing in photographs. Christopher canceled meetings. Their name, once a ticket into any room, had become a stain. Through it all, I stayed in my chair, steady. My lawyer kept me informed. Files had reached the right hands. Officials were moving faster than I expected. I didn't need to knock on their door or shout through their windows. Truth was already seated at their table, unwelcome but immovable. One evening, I passed their mansion, on my way back from the store. The curtains were drawn, the driveway empty. A house that once gleamed now hunched in darkness. I paused only a moment, long enough to see the cracks I had predicted spreading across their facade. Then I walked on, steady steps crunching through snow, not out of pity, not out of triumph, but with the calm of a man who knows the measure has been set, the cut made, and the balance restored. Christopher had always been good at charm. He believed that a smile and a firm handshake could fix anything. But charm does not pay debts. Charm does not unfreeze accounts. And charm cannot erase fraud, once it is written in ink. He tried, though. I heard he called old business partners, invited them for dinners, where he spoke of misunderstandings, of bureaucratic mistakes. They listened, nodded, then declined to invest another cent. Loyalty is thin when money is the glue. Rebecca fared worse. She stormed through boutiques, demanding to return gowns she had worn once, furious when clerks reminded her of store policy. Her voice, once dripping with mockery for me, now cracked in public. She accused Christopher of ruining her life, and the gossip pages lapped it up. Their empire was no longer the envy of the town, it was entertainment. Meanwhile, the children went quiet at school. No more boasting of vacations or expensive toys. Whispers followed them down hallways, the way whispers had once followed me after Christmas night. I thought of that, and I felt no joy, only a stern kind of balance. The weight had shifted. They were learning what humiliation feels like when laughter turns against you. At home, I kept sanding a piece of oak for no reason other than to keep my hands busy. Each stroke of the sandpaper reminded me, patience. Just as rough wood smooths with steady effort, truth was smoothing their lives down to the grain. Harsh, unvarnished, undeniable. I did not rush the outcome. I didn't need to. The process had begun, and it would finish on its own. All I had to do was watch as the house they built on lies began to crumble, beam by beam. It was the children who felt it next. They once carried their mother's smirks like armor, repeating her words to cut me down. Now those same mouths stayed shut. At school, classmates whispered about raids, about fraud, about police cars outside their mansion. Children can be cruel, and mine were no exception. The grandchildren who once mocked me now knew the sting of laughter turned sharp. I heard from a neighbor that Rebecca tried to shield them, insisting none of it was true. But children notice when cupboards grow bare, when gifts vanish, when parents argue late into the night. They saw Christopher pacing, saw Rebecca's tears, saw the weight crushing what had once been untouchable, and they began to understand what shame feels like. One afternoon, I walked past the park and spotted them with their nanny. They saw me too. For a moment, our eyes met. The youngest shifted as if to run toward me, then froze, unsure. Rebecca's shadow loomed too large in their memories. I raised my hand in a small wave, nothing more. They hesitated, then lifted theirs just slightly before turning back to their play. It was not forgiveness, it was not reconciliation, but it was a crack in the wall she had built between us, a sign that truth was reaching even them. At home, I sat by the fire and thought about that moment. I did not seek revenge against children. They had only echoed what they heard. But life had a way of teaching lessons none of us could shield them from. They would learn, as their parents learned, that arrogance collapses under the weight of lies. And I, the man they once called junk, was no longer waiting to be acknowledged. I was only waiting for the final beam to break. Christopher had always walked with confidence, chest out, chin high, the kind of posture that made people believe him before he even spoke. But confidence doesn't pay creditors. Confidence doesn't erase frozen accounts. And when desperation sets in, confidence collapses faster than rotten beams. I heard from my lawyer that Christopher tried to call in every favor he had. Old colleagues, wealthy acquaintances, even distant relatives. He asked for loans, for investments, for a way to stop the bleeding. One by one, they turned him down. Some were polite, others blunt, but all of them said no. Reputation is currency, and his was now worthless. Rebecca tried her own form of rescue. She gathered her jewelry, handbags, and gowns, attempting to sell them quietly. But whispers travel faster than sales. Buyers offered a fraction of their value, knowing desperation when they smelled it. She sold anyway, her pride buckling under the weight of unpaid bills. Their world shrank. Vacations were canceled. Cars sat idle. Staff left without notice. The mansion that once bustled with guests now echoed with emptiness. Behind those walls, Rebecca and Christopher turned on each other, blame passed like a torch, each accusing the other of striking the match that set their empire aflame. And I sanded wood in my small workshop, steady, deliberate. Each stroke of the paper against oak was a reminder. Collapse is loud, but truth is steady. They scrambled for lifelines, but the sea had already claimed them. I did not rejoice. I did not pity. I simply understood. The weight they mocked in me was the same weight dragging them under. And still, the final reckoning had yet to arrive. The raid came sooner than I expected. Sirens cut through the morning air, flashing lights painting the snow outside their mansion in red and blue. Neighbors gathered at the edges of the street, whispering, pointing. Some filmed with their phones, eager to capture the fall of the family that once held themselves so high. I did not stand among them. I watched from a distance, hidden in plain sight, as officers carried out boxes of documents, computers, even furniture marked as evidence. Rebecca stood on the porch, hair disheveled, her expensive robe clutched around her like it could still shield her. Christopher argued with one of the officers until a warning hand silenced him. His charm had no power here. The children clung to their nanny, eyes wide, their world collapsing in sirens and commands. Rebecca tried to shield her face from cameras, but the flashes were relentless. She had loved the spotlight once. Now it burned. I turned away before it ended. I did not need to see them driven off, nor hear Rebecca's cries. The sound of the sirens was enough. It was the sound of truth arriving, undeniable, unyielding. Back home, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in silence. The news would spread within hours. Headlines would tell the story, reporters would speculate, neighbors would gossip, but none of that mattered to me. I had seen what I needed to see, the weight of lies finally crushing the ones who had built their life on them. And for the first time in years, my silence was not heavy, it was light. Because now, the world spoke for me. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed their downfall. Whitman Empire under investigation, luxury built on lies. Their photographs filled the pages, no longer framed in admiration but in disgrace. I read each article slowly, sipping my tea, steady as stone. The world finally saw what I had known all along: their wealth was paint on rotting wood. Neighbors avoided their house. Once, Rebecca had relished every wave, every compliment about her garden parties. Now curtains stayed drawn, the driveway empty, silence pressing heavier than judgment itself. Their allies melted away. Invitations vanished. Phones stopped ringing. They had lived by the approval of others, and now others turned away like a draft through an open door. I received calls, too. People who had once whispered pity in my direction now spoke with awe. "Gabriel, you must feel vindicated." I gave them no satisfaction. "I feel nothing," I said. And it was true. What I felt was not triumph but balance. What was crooked had been corrected. Nothing more. In the evenings, I sat by my fire, tools in hand, carving small things, boxes, frames, toys with hidden compartments. Not because anyone would use them, but because working wood soothed me. Every stroke reminded me of order, of patience, of truth that does not bend. Outside, the world buzzed with scandal. Inside, my hands moved steady, and my heart was quiet. I did not need to lift a finger anymore. The law had taken hold, the press had spoken, society had judged. Christopher and Rebecca were no longer untouchable. They were ordinary, flawed, exposed. And I, once mocked as junk, was simply myself again, silent, steady, unbroken. The call came late at night. I knew the voice before he said a word. Christopher, my son. Once, the sound of him would have filled me with pride. Now it carried only desperation. "Dad, we need to talk." His voice cracked, stripped of the confidence he had worn like armor all his life. I agreed to meet him, not out of sympathy, but to finish what had been building since that Christmas night. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed. He tried to speak of misunderstandings, of mistakes, of people conspiring against him. I listened without interruption. When he was done, I placed a folder on the table. The same folder I had handed to my lawyer months before, now stamped with words he could not deny. AUDIT, investigation, subpoena. His hands trembled as he flipped through the papers. His lips parted, but no words came. The weight of truth was heavier than any excuse he could conjure. I leaned forward, my voice steady, almost gentle. "This isn't revenge, Christopher. This is accountability." For the first time in years, he looked at me, really looked. And in his eyes I saw not the son I raised, but the man he had become. A man who had built his life on lies, and now sat beneath their collapse. I rose, left a few dollars for my coffee, and stood tall. No anger, no gloating, just the silence of a carpenter whose work was finished. Outside, the night air was crisp. Snow fell in slow, steady flakes, each one dissolving as it touched the ground. I walked away without looking back, my steps sure, my heart light. Their reckoning was no longer mine to carry. The empire collapsed faster than I expected. Creditors swarmed, businesses shuttered, properties listed for sale. Rebecca packed her jewels and stormed out, leaving Christopher alone in the wreckage. The mansion that once glowed with lights now stood dark, a hollow shell echoing with unpaid bills and broken promises. I heard of it all through the news, through neighbors, through whispers that carried easily in a town hungry for gossip. But I did not visit, did not call. Their ruin was not my spectacle. It was simply the natural end of a house built on lies. Rebecca filed for divorce soon after. She had clung to wealth, not loyalty. And when wealth slipped through her fingers, so did her vows. Christopher was left alone, his name tarnished, his reputation poisoned beyond repair. Every door he once opened with ease now closed before him. Friends who once toasted him now crossed the street to avoid his eyes. And I? I lived quietly, modestly, as I always had. My small house held more peace than their mansion ever did. I brewed my tea, carved my wood, tended to the little garden out back. Dignity was not bought in stores or secured in bank accounts. It was earned by truth, and truth was mine again. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window and saw a man weathered, older, but unbroken. I remembered the night I stood humiliated under Christmas lights. Now those lights no longer haunted me. They were only a memory, dim compared to the steady glow of freedom. I did not celebrate their fall. I did not mourn it either. I simply accepted it as balance restored. What I had now was not revenge. It was clarity, the kind that comes only after years of sacrifice and silence finally find their answer. It was the grandchildren who returned first, not with fanfare, not with apologies, but with hesitation. One afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, 3 small faces peered up at me, uncertain. Behind them stood their nanny, shifting nervously. "They wanted to see you," she said softly. For a moment, I could not move. Then I stepped aside, letting them in. The house, once so empty, filled again with the sound of children's shoes scuffing against the floorboards. They looked around as if stepping into another world, simple, modest, but warm. I brought out a tin of cookies, the kind I had always baked, and placed them on the table. The youngest reached first, nibbling, then smiling. The others followed, and soon crumbs dotted the wood I had polished 100 times. They laughed at my old rocking chair, asked about the wooden toys still lined on the shelves. Hesitation turned into curiosity into comfort. I did not mention their parents. I did not remind them of the words they once repeated after Rebecca. Children are not guilty of the lessons they are taught. They are only guilty if they never learn better. So, I let them play, let them rediscover what it meant to have a grandfather. When they left, the house was quiet again, but not empty. Their laughter lingered in the corners, faint but real. For the first time in years, I felt something return, not pride, not triumph, but a softer thing, belonging. I knew Rebecca would not approve. I knew Christopher was too broken to object. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the small knock on my door, the simple truth that even after lies and humiliation, blood still finds its way home. Life settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten. Mornings with tea and the hum of the kettle, afternoons in the workshop shaping scraps of oak into boxes or frames, evenings by the fire with a book or silence for company. My house was quiet, but no longer hollow. It was mine, filled with dignity Rebecca could never throw into a bin. Neighbors stopped by now and then, no longer with pity but with respect. They asked me to repair chairs, to carve shelves, to build small things with care. I obliged, not for money, but for the satisfaction of working wood beneath my hands again. Each piece carried more honesty than Christopher's entire empire ever had. The grandchildren visited from time to time. They would sit at my table, munching cookies, tracing their fingers over the grooves of the rocking horse Rebecca once rejected. Their laughter softened the corners of the house. I never pressed them with questions, never forced them to choose between loyalty to their parents and love for me. I simply gave them space where they could be children, free from judgment. As for Christopher, he did not come. His absence hung like a draft under the door, noticeable but not unbearable. I no longer waited for his knock, no longer longed for his voice. The man I had raised was gone, consumed by choices he made long before the raid. What remained of him was not mine to save. In that truth, I found peace. My life was smaller than theirs had been, but steadier. While their world collapsed under the weight of lies, mine stood on beams of honesty, and in that modest strength I finally saw what I had gained. Not riches, not recognition, but freedom the kind no scandal can touch. It was Christopher who broke the silence at last. He came to my house one evening, not with arrogance, not with Rebecca at his side, but alone. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his shoulders bent. For a moment I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy I had once carried into bed, whispering promises into his hair. He stood in the doorway and struggled to speak. "Dad, I'm sorry for everything." I listened, hands resting on the back of a chair. His words trembled, desperate, but they did not reach me. I had carried those apologies in my heart for years, waiting, aching, but when they finally came, they were too late, too hollow. I didn't know how far it would go, he stammered. I lost everything. Rebecca's gone. The kids, They look at me different. I wanted to make you proud. I let him finish, the silence between us heavier than any reprimand. Then I spoke, steady and calm. Forgiveness is for those who repent before the walls fall, Christopher. You never did. His eyes filled, and for a second he looked ready to collapse. But I did not move to catch him. I had carried him long enough. He left soon after, his figure shrinking down the snowy path. I watched from the window, not with anger, not with relief, but with certainty. My role as his savior had ended years ago. My role now was only to stand in the truth I had fought to reclaim. And so I closed the door, the latch clicking firm, and returned to my chair. The fire crackled steady, like a heartbeat. For the first time in decades, I felt no weight on my shoulders. The man who left my doorstep was no longer my burden. He was simply a man facing the balance of his choices. Rebecca vanished from our lives as swiftly as she had entered. The divorce papers were swift, the settlement bitter. She retreated to another city, chasing new wealth, new faces to charm. I heard whispers of her selling what little remained, her jewelry, her gowns, her pride. But she was gone from us, gone from me, and I wasted no thought on her. The storm she had sown had consumed her as surely as it had Christopher. Christopher himself lived smaller now, renting a modest apartment, stripped of the grandeur he once wore like a crown. I passed him once on the street by chance. He did not see me, or perhaps pretended not to. His hair was unkempt, his clothes plain, his stride no longer confident. He looked like any other man who had learned that the world does not bend forever. I felt no satisfaction at his fall, nor did I feel sorrow. What I felt was distance, a line drawn clear. He had chosen silence when I needed his voice, betrayal when I had offered him everything, and choices, once made, carved paths that cannot be uncut. My life carried on without him. The grandchildren came sometimes, filling the house with cautious laughter. Neighbors sought my hands for small repairs, trusting the steadiness of a man who had weathered storms. And in the quiet moments, I sat with tea, listening to the crackle of fire, hearing peace in the silence that once mocked me. Rebecca had erased herself. Christopher had lost himself. And I had found myself again. Another Christmas came. My tree was smaller, its ornaments simple, but it glowed with a warmth that no mansion could match. The grandchildren sat around it, giggling as they unwrapped modest gifts, books, puzzles, toys, carved by my own hands. This time, no one sneered, no one threw anything in the trash. Their laughter rang pure, filling the room with a joy I thought I had lost forever. I watched them carefully, not clinging, not demanding, just letting them be children. They traced their fingers along the wooden horse that still stood in the corner, the one Rebecca once dismissed. The youngest asked if he could ride it. My heart caught in my throat as I nodded. His laughter as he rocked back and forth was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. There was no Rebecca that night, no Christopher, only the children and me, and the steady crackle of the fire. I baked cookies, and they begged for more. I told them stories, and they begged for another. Their eyes shone not with pity, but with wonder, the same wonder Christopher once had in the workshop long ago. When they finally left, the house was quiet, but not empty. It carried echoes of their joy, lingering in every corner. I sat by the fire, hands folded, and realized something simple and profound. Humiliation had been replaced by honor. Not the honor others give, but the kind you reclaim for yourself. The trees sparkled softly in the corner. I did not need grandeur or approval or applause. I had what mattered, and for the first time in a long while, Christmas felt like a gift again. Winter nights are quiet now. I walk outside sometimes, the snow crunching beneath my boots, the cold air sharp but clean. The world feels lighter without the weight. I once carried the weight of silence, of humiliation, of betrayal. I left those burdens behind the night. I slid that folder across the cafe table. I do not think of Rebecca. She is a ghost of greed, scattered to the wind. I do not dwell on Christopher. He made his choices, carved his path, and lives among the ruins of it. I no longer ache for his approval, nor crave his return. The man I raised exists only in memory, and memory is where he will stay. What I have now is freedom. Freedom from waiting for respect that never came. Freedom from holding my tongue at gatherings where I was mocked. Freedom from carrying shame that was never mine to bear. My house is modest, my days simple, but they are mine. Every board, every chair, every tool speaks of honest work. Nothing in these walls is built on lies. Sometimes, as snow falls heavy, I sit by the window and whisper to my wife's picture. I kept my promise. I gave him everything, and when he threw it away, I took back myself. Her smile in the faded frame seems to agree. I do not forgive. I do not forget. Forgiveness is for those who repent. Forgetting is for those who wish to repeat mistakes. I choose neither. I choose to walk forward, steady, unburdened, free. The snow falls soft around me, covering the past like a blanket. I leave no footprints behind, only steps forward. And for the first time in many years, I am truly, completely free.